Hello? Hello, good morning. Please take a seat. We are going to start. Good morning, everyone. Welcome, everybody, to Madrid, to the Open Science Fair 2023. It's a great pleasure for us to see many friends and colleagues here today. Thank you very much. I am Pilar Rico. I'm the chair of the program committee from the Spanish Foundation for Science and Technology. We are here hosting and co-organizing together with OpenAIRE this 4th edition of the Open Science Fair. We are very proud and happy to have you here. This is a fully in-person event, but all the plenary sessions, that is the welcoming session, the keynote speakers, and the panel discussions will be live streamed through our YouTube channels for people to follow that. These recordings will be archived for later viewing, and the presentations will be made available in a few weeks as well. This event is going to be in English, but for the sake of equity, diversity, and inclusiveness, English-Spanish translation service has been provided. So you can choose in which language you want to hear the discussions and engage with them. In line with the Council conclusions of 2022 about open science and research assessment, following the multilingualism in academia spirit, some of our speakers will speak Spanish. So please use your handsets for you to engage in your preferred language. For the interaction with the speakers, we are going to use both the microphones on-site, and we are also using Mentimeter. So a QR code will be displayed on the screen at the end of each session. And now, without further delay, we are going to start with a welcoming session. Our first speaker is Cristina González Copeiro. She is the director of the Scientific Information Management Department at the Spanish Foundation for Science and Technology. She is going to give us a warm welcome on behalf of FECIT. Thank you very much, Cristina. The floor is yours.
Queridos y distinguidos investigadores, científicos, académicos, colegas, queridos amigos, buenos días y bienvenidos a Madrid. Bienvenidos a España, bienvenidos al Open Science Fair 2023. En primer lugar, quiero excusar en nombre de la directora general de la Fundación Española para la Ciencia y Tecnología, que no ha podido asistir hoy a la inauguración debido a cambios de última hora en su agenda. Sin embargo, mañana estará aquí para saludaros brevemente y daros una calurosa bienvenida institucional en nombre de FECIT. FECIT es una entidad pública del sector público estatal, dependiente funcional y orgánicamente del Ministerio de Ciencia e Innovación, que se fundó en 2001 con los objetivos de fortalecer el vínculo entre ciencia y sociedad a través de acciones que promuevan la ciencia abierta e inclusiva, la cultura científica y la educación, y para dar respuesta a las necesidades y retos del sistema español de ciencia, tecnología e innovación. Desde el 2007, FECIT desempeña un papel clave como proveedor de servicios para la comunidad investigadora, especialmente prestando soporte técnico a la implementación y despliegue de políticas públicas de ciencia y tecnología, con especial atención a las iniciativas de ciencia abierta. Es un placer para FECIT recibiros hoy en Madrid, aunados bajo la bandera de la ciencia abierta y amparados en el marco de la presidencia española del Consejo de la Unión Europea. En una era de rápidos avances tecnológicos y de la información, no se puede exagerar el papel de la ciencia abierta. Esta encarna el espíritu de colaboración, transparencia e innovación que impulsa el progreso en nuestra comunidad investigadora. Este año, con el debut del Open Science Fair en Madrid, no estamos simplemente organizando un evento. Estamos abriendo la puerta a un mundo de posibilidades, un mundo en el que el conocimiento fluye libremente, los datos se comparten abiertamente y la colaboración no conoce fronteras. En este punto, me gustaría dedicar un momento a destacar los fuertes lazos de colaboración entre nuestra institución coorganizadora OpenAIRE y FECIT. FECIT ha participado en todos los consorcios de OpenAIRE desde su primera edición, en 2009, y es miembro de la actual entidad legal desde su creación. Compartimos una visión común sobre cómo apoyar las infraestructuras digitales para la ciencia abierta basada en los mismos principios y dedicamos nuestros esfuerzos de forma coordinada a proporcionar servicios esenciales desde el sector público a nuestra comunidad. Juntos estamos allanando el camino hacia un futuro en el que la ciencia sea accesible para todos, traspasando fronteras y reuniendo a personas de todo el mundo a favor del acceso, la transparencia y la reproducibilidad de los resultados de investigación. Nuestra colaboración ha dado sus frutos de numerosas maneras, una de las cuales es el Open Science Fair, en el que nos encontramos hoy. Estoy segura de que el eco de este evento reforzará nuestra colaboración y abrirá nuevas puertas a iniciativas comunes. Gracias, OpenAIRE, por haber elegido Madrid para la cuarta edición de la Open Science Fair, la tercera presencial, y por el incansable trabajo y el gran esfuerzo de todo el equipo técnico para hacer posible este evento. También gracias a nuestros ponentes y panelistas, invitados, a quienes presentáis el resultado de vuestros trabajos, a todos los presentadores y moderadores de las sesiones y a todos los participantes por estar hoy aquí. Vuestra dedicación a los principios de la ciencia abierta es un testimonio del poder transformador de la investigación. Y, por supuesto, gracias a todo el equipo de FECIT, que no ha parado de trabajar para hacer posible este congreso. Para concluir esta sesión de bienvenida, quisiera animaros a embarcarnos juntos en este apasionante viaje en el que el futuro de la ciencia está abierta y las posibilidades son infinitas. Os animo a participar en todas las discusiones, compartir vuestras ideas e inspiraros mutuamente para avanzar en las fronteras de la ciencia y el conocimiento abierto, con los talleres, sesiones, demostraciones, charlas relámpago, paneles y debates que hemos preparado para vosotros. Vuestros éxitos serán los de todos. Again, thank you, OpenAIRE, for having chosen Madrid for this fourth edition of the Open Science Fair and for the great collaboration, spirit and fantastic work that you bring to our strong collaboration. Thank you to our keynote speakers and invited panelists, to all sessions presenters, and to all participants for being here today. Your dedication to the principles of open science is a testament to the transformative power of research. Con esto, declaro oficialmente inaugurado el Open Science Fair 2023. Disfrutad del Congreso, participad en debates fructíferos y empujemos todos juntos hacia los límites abiertos del conocimiento. Welcome to Madrid. I officially declare the Open Science Fair 2023 open. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Cristina, for your welcoming words. Now, I invite Inge van Nieuwerburgh, Chair of the Executive Board of OpenAIRE, to give us her welcome words. Thank you very much, Inge. The floor is all yours.
Hi, excuse me. Hi, everyone. It's quite impressive to be in an auditorium like this, seeing you all seated there. I'm very happy to see all of you here. This is the 4th edition, as already been said, of the Open Science Fair. We first have editions in 2017 in Athens, 2019 in Porto, and then due to COVID circumstances, of course, we had to do an online edition. So I'm very happy that we can do this in person again, and certainly in such a beautiful city as Madrid. So I'm very happy to be here. I see a lot of familiar faces. I have been hugging and kissing people everywhere. It's been so long since we've seen each other. Your presence here make this event all the more special, and I'm looking forward to reconnect with many of you, with all of you, talk about the endeavors that we have done experienced in our own countries, in our own organizations, and how we feel about that all together, and how we can drive open science together forward. OpenAIRE has come a long way since its inception. Some of you were there at the beginning. In December 2010, we launched OpenAIRE in my university, in Ghent University. It was very snowing that day, we will remember always. So it has been quite some time, and first we had all the project phases, but since 2018 we are a member-based non-profit organization, and we are happy to be there. Our mission remains steadfast, to transform scholarly communication towards openness and transparency. I can't stress this enough. Open scholarly communication, infrastructure and community is key to achieving open science with excellent science. We are deeply involved in aligning policies, developing cutting-edge services and providing training for open science practices. And we also reach out to different research stakeholders while fostering the community. And I can't stress enough how important this community is. I see you all here, and you work in your own organizations, collaborate within your countries, with other organizations, in European university networks or whatever, all to achieve the same goal, pushing open science forward, but mainly to make it a practice, a normal practice in research cycle. Now, last year, we outlined 5 strategic priority lines that are driving our efforts in 2023-2025. Let me go into them very briefly. Of course, infrastructure for open scholarly communication is at the heart of our services. We provided the necessary services to enable open and transparent scholarly communication. I, of course, need to mention the OpenAIRE graph that you all know. Many of you are contributing to that, and the graph is giving back a lot of services and information. A second is innovation in research communication and dissemination. We all know that a standstill is certainly not the right way to go, certainly in these AI times. We have some sessions about that tomorrow. So this innovation is key in our services. A third one is that open science cannot thrive without data and service quality. Everyone here, we all together, we want to make sure that everything that flows around in open science in the research cycle is trustworthy, is transparent and open for reuse as much as possible. And the data should be qualitative, that's for sure. In doing that, we support responsible research and career assessment. We advocate for open science integration into research and career assessment processes, and we create services to do so. We will go into that later today when we have a panel on research assessment and monitoring, and throughout the program you will see it come up again. Finally, monitoring the uptake of open science policies is also one of our priorities. We track the adoption and implementation of open science policies, and 2 examples of how we do that is the OpenAIRE Monitor and our involvement in the EOSC Observatory. These priorities that I just mentioned, these 5 priorities, are our compass for the next few years, guiding our choices for collaborative endeavors and where we invest our resources, because as you all know, resources are scarce. As you'll see in our program, these priorities are reflected in a diverse range of sessions and discussions, all lined up for you. I must say the program committee did a really fine job in getting this program together. So I'm very much looking forward to all the sessions in the next few days. Now, though OpenAIRE has a European background, our collaborative spirit doesn't stop at the European borders. We have forged warm and enduring connections around the world, demonstrating that our commitment to open science transcends geographical boundaries, something we can witness today. Because if you see the people here together, they come from 42 countries. So I'm happy to see you all represented here. Before closing, I want to extend my heartfelt gratitude to Física and the Spanish Ministry for Science and Innovation for their invaluable support in organizing this Open Science Fair. Without their partnership, this event would not be possible. Saying this, without further ado, let's dive into this rich program and make the most of the knowledge, sharing and collaboration that lie ahead. Welcome once again from our part, from OpenAIRE, to this Open Science Fair 2023.
Thank you, Inge. Thank you very much, OpenAIRE. Now I'm going to pass on the floor to our General Secretary for Science at the Ministry for Science and Innovation, Raquel Yotti. Thank you very much for the steady support that the government provides us in the endeavor of Open Science, Raquel. Thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Dear friends and colleagues, good morning and welcome again to Madrid. It is my pleasure as the Secretary General for Research to inaugurate the Open Science Fair 2023 in our country in collaboration with FECID and also with OpenAIRE as part of the events of the Spanish Presidency of the Council of the European Union. Thank you to both organizations for bringing this initiative to Madrid at such an important time for us. In the past year, Spain has undertaken a significant set of actions in support of open science. Firstly, we have implemented substantial changes in the regulatory framework. The 2022 reform of the Science and Innovation Law strengthens the mandate for open science, for open access to publicly funded research results, and expands its regulatory scope to encompass open science. The new legislation recognizes science as a public good, broadens the concept of research results beyond scientific publications, reinforces the role of institutional repositories, empowers researchers in retaining intellectual property rights, and paves the way for a reform on the research assessment system based on open science parameters. This legal reform has been mirrored by the 2023 Organic Law on Universities, which has introduced very similar modifications in its wording and objectives. Furthermore, on May 3, 2023, the Council of Ministers approved the National Open Science Strategy 2023-2027. Our strategy brings together the institutional commitments of all funding agencies, research performing organizations, and research assessment agencies in our country. Its creation has been a collaborative process spanning 2 years, involving medium and high-level decision-makers from the Ministries of Science and Innovation, the Ministry of Universities, the National Research Funding Agency, the National Research Assessment Agency, ANECA, the National Institute of Health Carlos III, a broad representation of all research-performing organizations, and the Spanish Foundation for Science and Technology, FECIT, which coordinated all the technical work. This strategy builds upon and complements the commitment to open science in the Spanish strategy for science, technology, and innovation. Its mission is to strengthen the quality, transparency, and reproducibility of scientific activity in Spain, improve dissemination among the scientific community and knowledge transfer to society, and design how Spain responds to the challenges faced by the Spanish scientific community in this global paradigm. The National Open Science Strategy is structured around 4 strategic objectives, each aligned with 4 key action areas and encompasses 17 specific actions that outline how they will be executed within specified timeframes at the short, medium, and long term. The strategic objectives of ENCA are 4 and are aligned with those that has been previously described of OpenAIRE. The first one is to ensure the existence of a robust and well-articulated interoperable digital infrastructures capable of absorbing the impact of implementing a national open science policy and facilitating its integration into the international ecosystem, including, where applicable, the European Open Science Cloud. Second is promote proper management of research data generated by the national R&I system through the FAIR principles. The third one is to implement an open and free access by default to publications and scientific results directly or indirectly funded with public funds for the entire population. And the fourth one is to establish new research assessment mechanisms and a system of incentives and recognition aimed at promoting open science practice, as well as providing training to all personnel, researchers, managers, funders, evaluators, to align their professional performance with the principles of open science. Many of the challenges that we face as a country and we face as a society, as a European society, will be discussed in the coming days at the Open Science Fair. How to reform the research assessment system, how the role of artificial intelligence as a catalyst for open science, the role of research infrastructures, a new model of communicating research output. Our national community is deeply involved in this paradigm shift and actively participates in international discussion. As an example, there are more than 70 Spanish institutions participating in COARA, with a Spanish national chapter led by our National Research Assessment Agency, by ANECA. We are actively engaged in the EOSC Steering Board, in many infra-EOSC projects, and the EOSC Association. As many of you know, last week we hosted the EOSC Symposium here in Madrid with a great participation and a high-level debate. And we have also FECIT. FECIT is one of the leading institutions in the AMAS project and has recently joined OPERAS as the national node. FECIT is also the national node of La Referencia and OpenAIRE, our co-organizers of the Open Science Fair, whom we maintain an excellent collaborative and mutual committing relationship. And to conclude, I wish you all a very fruitful Open Science Fair, and let me express again my gratitude to all of you for your attendance and mainly for your commitment to the important task that unites us here, reimagining the open science for next generations. Thank you very much.
So let's start with the keynote session today. I am very honored to have here Professor Maria Cetto. She is the professor at the Instituto de Física, Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México, and chair of the UNESCO Global Open Science Steering Committee, so very fit to speak here, I would say. Now, over the years, she has done research on quantum mechanics, has been involved in the management of several international organizations, like she was the General Secretary of the International Council for Science. She has been recognized in different occasions. She was, for example, awarded as a Woman of the Year in Mexico in 2003. She is engaged in open science, and as said, she is the chair of the UNESCO Global Open Science Steering Committee. I would say we are very happy to listen to you. Professor Cetto, the floor is yours, and I'm looking. Professor Cetto? Was there a problem with the microphone, or? Okay. Just one moment of patience. Apparently there is a problem with the microphone. You'll always have a little bump in the road. There she is. Welcome, Professor Cetto.
Well, good morning. Buenos días a todos. Good morning. Sorry, but I was told the microphone wasn't working well. So, well, in the first place, I would like to say that I'm very happy to be here with you, and all my thanks go to OpenAIRE, of course, and to FECIT, to Pilar Rico, in particular to the Spanish Ministry for Science and Innovation. I would like to say that this is not the first time that I take part recently in an event organized by FECIT and by the Spanish government, and I'm very happy to see that Spain, among other things, has been making very good efforts to build bridges between Europe and Latin America, and maybe that is one of the reasons why I'm here. I will give certainly the Latin American perspective, because that is what I know pretty well, I think, and as much as possible also a more global perspective now coming from the UNESCO side. So why have I chosen this title, Open Science and an Evolving Ecosystem? Well, it is becoming commonplace to refer to the open science scene as an ecosystem. You have heard already this term in the previous interventions this morning. And I wonder, do we really know what we mean by the word? Do we know what an ecosystem is? And I thought this is a good occasion to perhaps delve into this concept and try to see whether we are aware of what it means to have an ecosystem. It's not just any system. So if we can go to the next slide, or shall I? Yes, here. This is a title that has been given to our meeting that starts today, Charting the Course, Reimagining Open Science for Next Generations. It's interesting that at this stage we already are thinking of reimagining open science, no? When open science is a relatively new concept in itself. So I will start with a discussion of what an ecosystem means, and for natural ecosystems that we are, of course, much more familiar with, and human ecosystems, which are something different, have their own features. And in order to be able to speak a bit of the landscape of open access today, which, as I see it, is still a fragmented landscape, and which is not necessarily bad, but that's what I'm going to talk about. And then the transition from open access to open science, which is still ongoing, and perhaps some of us are more still in the spirit of open access rather than really more broadly speaking open science, which is something different for more than one reason. And this gives me an opportunity to talk about or come back to the UNESCO's open science principles, which I'm sure you are familiar with, and to say a few words about the way forward. Of course, we will have occasion later, I hope so, to have a discussion, a more open discussion on that. So, what is an ecosystem to start with? Well, we are basically, as I said, used to thinking of natural ecosystems. That word is not so old either. In fact, perhaps 50 years ago or so, it started to become relatively fashionable, but nowadays it is already part of our everyday jargon, let's say. And we are used to what we would call a basic definition. It is a community or group of living organisms that live in and interact with each other in a specific environment. And they're balanced systems. That's very important. They have a way of using feedback to keep somehow the balance within the ecosystem. Although, of course, there are natural imbalances which tend to offset each other permanently, but they evolve. And they evolve slowly. Some of them, others may evolve quickly, and in extreme cases, they may disappear. Something very important that distinguishes the natural ecosystems from the non-natural ecosystems are that they have no finality or purpose of their own. One important addition to this is that we are significantly modifying the natural ecosystems. Sometimes we even end up completely changing an ecosystem from its original foundations. No? So the need for integrated concepts capable of satisfying natural and social scientists and supporting integrated research motivates a conceptual framework for understanding the roles of humans in ecosystems today. There are virtually no more 100% natural ecosystems that have not somehow suffered or been, let's say, the object of human intervention. And we have learned to create artificial ecosystems. For instance, zoos, no? Or an aquarium, which are open. No? They are open, they are not closed. There have been some attempts also by scientists to create closed ecosystems, like an ecosphere. Maybe you have seen them in some science museum. No? But the nature of closed ecosystems, like an ecosphere, is to wind down. They don't have a permanent life of their own. So learning and feedback between the human and the natural components have to be there. And they're actually key attributes of an integrated model, because ecosystems need to respond to an integrated model. They are systems in the first place. Both spatial heterogeneity and organizational hierarchies are important in both the natural and the social ecosystems, and they play a very important role in artificial ecosystems. We have to have heterogeneity, and organizational hierarchies. So then there are the human ecosystems, like, for instance, an open science ecosystem can be. They are created by humans from scratch in opposition to a zoo or an aquarium. No? And the authors of the study that I'm mentioning here, they propose what they have studied in depth is a business ecosystem model. Of course, open science is not necessarily a business, but there is not much literature on 100% artificial ecosystems. So we have to, doesn't go? Yes. So we have to really take a step back and think, why are we already talking about an open science ecosystem? Well, because they have particular features, like the ones that are mentioned here. People can bring into being new things. There is a capacity to innovate that have not existed before. And this innovation, as you know, is another catchword of today. No? Another important conclusion of this study, the human ecosystem it's called, by Moore and other authors, is that if we continue to consider most of the people on Earth as burdens to be shouldered or as customers to be served, we will fail. We have to consider everybody as an equal member in principle of the ecosystem. At the center, in platforms as currently designed, there is limited intelligence and sensitivity to the realities of the people. Technology, of course, can connect people and augment their activities, but value creation is accomplished through billions of daily creative acts. So, the authors of this study on the theory of ecosystems see the ecosystem as a set of authors, of actors with varying degrees of multilateral, non-generic complementarities that are not fully hierarchically controlled. So it's not a centralized, fully centralized system. It's not centralized, centrally controlled. And what is very important, and I emphasize here, is that the various members of the ecosystem must have complementary roles, but non-generic, that is rather specific. You know? This should be an attribute of any ecosystem and of open science ecosystems in particular. Also, modularity, though not necessarily open interoperability, enables ecosystem emergence as it allows a set of distinct yet interdependent organizations to coordinate with full hierarchical fiat. In a modular architecture, the distinct parts of the ecosystem represent organizations that are separated by crossing points. That's an interesting concept. That is discrete parts of the process. So ecosystems organize around a focus, a value proposition, no? Or they can organize around a platform. I like the idea of having value propositions. And the behavior in an ecosystem and ultimately its success is affected by the rules of engagement and the nature of the standards and interfaces. For instance, open versus closed, imposed versus emergent, etc. The member organisms also include suppliers, lead producers, competitors, and other stakeholders. Over time, they evolve their capabilities and roles and tend to align themselves with the directions set by one or more central organizations. Can be, for instance, UNESCO. No? Those companies holding leadership roles may change over time, of course. So human ecosystems certainly need to evolve, and they evolve. Now, what is the landscape today of open access? Is it already an ecosystem? Does it really satisfy or comply with the characteristics that have been identified so far for a human ecosystem? Well, that's where I speak of a fragmented landscape. We have, as you can see from this slide, quite different, even conflicting concepts, models, etc., of open access. And this refers not to open science, but to open access at this stage, because that's where we really can already speak of something with definite characteristics, which is not the case of open science yet. So, of open science yet, yes, but in open access we have already enough experience along the years to be able to have come up even with these very, very different types of open access, especially in what refers to scientific or scholarly publishing. No? So there are, as you can see, different but even conflicting concepts, models, types of open access, which are operating today. It is a fact. For example, in my region, in Latin America and the Caribbean, open access means free and open access for everybody. And it is a concept that has a much longer trajectory and history than the open access with capital letters. No? We used to speak of open access with normal small letters since long ago. There are no paywalls, no APCs. Also, open access trends differ substantially, as we will see. It's not just what do we have today, but the trends differ. And if we are speaking of an ecosystem, we have to have that in mind. According to, and this is an example. I don't want to give many examples, but I thought if I take this one, which is, it comes from OpenAPC, this should serve as an illustration of what I mean by conflicting types and conflicting trends, and the fitting concepts even. No? We have here, according to the initial Open APC register of 2005, we have three publishers, no? Each one with what they charge for APCs. This is the Open APC environment, open not to authors but to readers, to users. And some of you might remember, although, that even before that, and decades ago, and at least those who have been publishing already for some time, or perhaps of an older generation, were already used to having to pay some page charge, as it was called. I remember having had to pay for physical review something like $60 per page or something like that. And that was normal for the journals of the American Physical Society and others as well. No? And once I had the occasion to talk with the chief editor-in-chief of American Physical Society of those times in the 90s, Martin Blume, and he explained to me in those times, in the 1990s, that this was their main source of income of the whole American Physical Society, and that is why they charged this fee, so-called page charge, because it was used to support the other activities of the American Physical Society. What is the landscape today? Well, this is a very nice chart of the whole average data from 2005 to 2023, no? Which is 18 years. No? And it has many more entries. You can see the last ones, the smaller ones, one cannot even identify. And this is what has been registered. It's not a whole landscape worldwide. It is what has been registered by the Open APC system. So it is not actually the world total, it's the total that has been registered. But it's 367 million, which is not bad. No? And why has this landscape changed so much? Well, because the plan has boosted the APC business model even with some publishers charging over $5,000 or even euros per article, which for many of us, for me in particular, means these journals are not open for us as authors. They're closed. Our universities are making some effort to change this situation for their authors, for the researchers, but I will speak about that a bit later. So this boost has led to an exponential increase. This is really exponential. We're used to speaking of increases always as exponential. They're not always exponential, but this one is certainly. It is an increase. Probably it will come to more, say, to a new baseline. But for the time, we're still we are still in the exponential phase. In increase in transformative agreements between universities and corporate publishers around the world, not only in Europe, but everywhere. The universities have to make an effort to sign these agreements, which means an extra payment already even advanced beforehand, no, for their authors to be able to publish in those journals. And the result is an accumulated figure of 900,000 papers in this graph, which I wonder, and I'm sure I'm not the only one, are hardly read by the potential users, because there is so much being published today, so much that it is really very difficult, sometimes impossible, to keep abreast of all what is being published, because one also has to be working to prepare one's own papers and get them published. So this is a challenge today. Are we really going for open science because we need to read more, or and we have the time and the resources to do it? So these are open questions. I share them with you, and as a matter of reflection. This APC business adds to the already very huge business of the large publishers. And all this capital flow from around the world, because as I said, universities from all around the world are striving to get access, open access to publications, is concentrated in or transferred to a few countries in Europe and the United States. We must bear in mind that in the last half century, tens of thousands of journals have appeared all over the world, and every year more than 2.5 million articles are published. 2.5 million. Are there so many readers? There are hundreds of journals in each discipline, and there is so much new information that it is almost impossible, as I said, to keep up to date. So, but the potential for business is huge. No wonder there is a proliferation of publishers, of all kinds of publishers, well-meaning or malicious, who take advantage of this window of opportunity to also make a profit. And here I have included the fragment of a poet, of a well-known poet, Spanish poet, Francisco de Quevedo. It's interesting because he lived in the late 16th, early 17th century, and well, for those who don't understand Spanish, maybe we can refer to the translation later on. But I have included it because making business and giving money this important role, a powerful role, is not something new. It's already there in the late 16th century. I can take here from an internet translation the words, "Mother, I humble myself to gold. He is my lover and my beloved, for he is always yellow in love. So whether it's double or single, he does everything I want. A mighty gentleman is money." Well, but not with the same intensity everywhere, as you can see from this pie chart and of so-called predatory publishers. You might ask, if you look at the pie chart, why is the Latin American figure so low? Well, because of what I said earlier on, open access has always existed in Latin America because the journals have mostly been maintained by universities and learned societies, and therefore publicly funded. They see it, our institutions see open access, see publishing as part of their mission. It's not something they have to get extra money for. Perhaps they sacrifice some of other projects, but they maintain their journals. It has always been like that. APC represents an additional cost for them because they have funded the research and must also fund the publication of the results, in addition to continuing to pay subscription fees, quite high subscription fees, and maintain their own journals. For example, in 2022, my own university, Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México, spent over 20.5 million euros on commercial databases and journal subscriptions in 1 year, plus an unspecified amount on APCs, which cannot be measured because it is partly confidential. But the people from our library system estimate that the amount of fees paid in the form of APCs and transformative agreements is already reaching a similar quantity. In addition to promoting the quality and visibility of the journals and providing free and open access to them, this well-established ecosystem, what you see here, and I speak freely in this case of an ecosystem, in which the members play the specific non-generic complementary roles, promotes shared values and benefits from the commonality of its members. Speaking of commonalities, one of them, an important one, is the widespread use, of course, of Spanish and Portuguese, which we share with Spain and Portugal. At the same time, we are inclusive in these systems that make up the Latin American open access ecosystem. It is a well-established ecosystem in which the members play complementary roles, specific, and promote shared values and benefits from the commonality of its members. And an important role is precisely the language, but you can see that we are inclusive because we include also other languages. Whatever is published in other languages in the region, scholarly publications, is also taken into account. as you can see from the right side, from the Latindex menu, you click on languages and you get this list. And if other languages appear, we take them also into account. And we promote language diversity, multilingualism. We are mindful also of the link, because why do we do it? Because we are mindful of the link between linguistic and cultural diversity and biodiversity. The link between cultural and biodiversity has now been scientifically established. And in a specific case of Mexico, the Comisión Nacional de Biodiversidad has made some interesting studies correlating both language diversity, cultural diversity with biodiversity, which is also an essential concept today for all of us. Free and open access is not just a principle for us, it is the reality, as you can see from this map, and it works, it works. Nevertheless, and contrary to our tradition, some publishers, predatory or not, are following this mainstream commercial business model and starting to charge APCs. A few ones you can see in Brazil, for instance, in Mexico, a few in Argentina, taking advantage of what, of course, of the pressure to publish placed on authors by the performance assessment systems. Given this fragmented landscape, what are the prospects for the transition from open access to open science when we have this fragmented landscape? What are the guiding principles, if we want to speak of an old ecosystem? The rules of engagement that can guarantee a healthy open science ecosystem. Is the community ready and willing to shift gears? This is where the UNESCO 2021 recommendation on open science comes in. It provides an international framework for open science policy and practice that aims to reduce the technological and knowledge divides between and within countries. It outlines a common definition and shared values, principles and standards for open science at the international level, and it proposes actions to support fair and equitable open science for all at individual, institutional, national, regional, and international levels. Open science is not an end in itself, but a means towards fairer, more equitable, diverse, and inclusive research systems that are better geared towards the production, dissemination, and use of scientific knowledge that helps address societal challenges with benefits for all. It is an inclusive construct that combines various movements and practices aiming to make multilingual scientific knowledge openly available, accessible, and reusable for everyone. To increase scientific collaborations and sharing of information for the benefits of science and society, and to open the processes of scientific knowledge creation, evaluation, and communication to societal actors beyond the traditional scientific community. UNESCO itself, with the support of 5 ad hoc working groups, is helping its member states to implement this recommendation. And to the 5 main challenges identified by the working groups, which are listed here, and if you, I'm sure you have, you see regularly, you visit the UNESCO Open Science webpage, I am adding another one, which I see we have to bear in mind when transiting from open access to open science, which is moving away from for-profit business models that exacerbate inequities and run counter to UNESCO's open science principles and values, which are the basis for an open science community ecosystem. UNESCO itself, with its working groups, is helping all member states, and it is very interesting how each and every one member state of UNESCO is taking open science seriously their own way. And also regionally, we are trying to understand how to engage in this large open science our own way. I have added this one because this last requisite for implementing, for a true implementation of the recommendation, because I think it is needed for a true open science ecosystem. So this is how UNESCO sees the way forward. It is about making sure not only the scientific knowledge is accessible, but also that the production of that knowledge itself is inclusive, equitable, and sustainable. Thank you very much.
Hello. Yeah, I'm back. Thanks a lot for a very inspiring talk. We'll have a little panel after the second talk of Michael Arentoft, but maybe there's one or two questions at this moment specifically and on this presentation. Is there anything that you would like to ask now? Because I have a lot of questions. I'm just going to ask one question to start. Yeah. I saw that the tension in Latin America between free and open access, as you said, yes, and then APC movement there becomes a tension that more and more, yes, is asked. More journals start to charge APCs, and also researchers start to pay APCs to get published. Are they pressured to publish in APC journals? Do they choose that themselves? Is it, what do you see, and what do you think we should do about it?
Well, these are three questions. Yes, yeah. Well, I will start with the second one. Yes. Yeah. Our colleagues feel pressure to publish in journals that charge APCs, because these journals are included in the commercial databases that are still used as a symbol of quality by the assessment systems. And there is a trend to revise these criteria of individual performance assessment, but this takes some time. And particularly the young researchers, those who start, feel that pressure very, very high. And and that's why also they sometimes feel prey to the what is called in English the predatory journals. We don't call them predatory in Spanish, but this is the language, no? So yes, a few journals start charging APCs. Some of these journals are new because many journals are being created now online, and they see, of course, the opportunity to charge, no? Yeah. And not for malicious purposes, because they do some business, but even the page charges they charge are much lower. In fact, I've been editor-in-chief of a well-established Mexican journal, the Revista Mexicana de Física, and I know that an article, processing an article costs to the whole, let's say, editorial system not more than $150 per article. Yes, yeah, of course. And then there are some of these journals, for instance, in Brazil and some in Mexico, that are charging of the order of $160, $200. Yeah. That's understandable. It's not to cover costs. It's not what we prefer, but we understand it.
One last question on this before we move on. Is it also a question of impact on research in the world, that they feel pressured to then publish in these kind of journals?
It's a very good question. Those who feel they have to publish in, let's say, APC journals or in these big commercial publishers are the ones that are closer, that are part of international science. For instance, colleagues, Mexican colleagues who work in, with people in CERN, no? In the case of physics. In this more international science is, of course, more, yes, it is more natural for them. Yeah. They don't even question that. Of course, they have to, and then they have to get special projects so that they can pay for it. Well, I've had to pay, since I don't like having special projects, I've had to pay when I'm invited to write a paper for a journal of one of these big commercial publishers. I have had to pay it from my own pocket money. And that means for young researchers more than one monthly income.
That's certainly not the way to go.
Yes.
Certainly that is, sorry? Yeah, but we'll do questions after the next talk. We'll have a little panel. We come back to the stage after Michael, and then we will talk about this further on. Thanks a lot already for your input. And I hear that people are already starting to put questions in the Mentimeter. So don't hesitate, scan the QR code or go to Mentimeter and use the code 8497-9953 to gather your questions. That's for us here in the room, but also for people following hybrid from their own desks in their own organization or their home office. So I will leave it just a few minutes so that you can see the Mentimeter and don't hesitate to ask your questions. It might be a good idea to put in front of your question Madrid if you are in the room, because then maybe we can let you ask the questions here with the microphone. Okay, this being said, let's go to our second keynote speaker. So I invite Michael Arentoft here on the stage. He is the head of unit of the European Commission DG Research Innovation Open Science. And he has been working in different positions at the EC in the past before getting involved into open science. His background is in computer and information science. And as you know, the EC plays a vital role here in Europe as a policymaker and as a funder when we talk about open science. You have quite some busy weeks on open science and research infrastructures at the moment, and so I'm very happy that you are here. Please, the floor is yours. Thank you very much. It will come, I think. Not yet. Can you say something? No. We need the microphone of Mike.
The other one, if you want.
Can you say something?
Can I use this one?
Yeah,
yes.
It's okay.
Very good. So thank you, Inge. Thank you very much for welcoming me here. Very inspiring talk by Ana Maria. Thank you also to the Spanish Ministry, to FICIT, to OpenAIRE for inviting me here. I can see from the many concerns also that, or the many challenges mentioned by Ana Maria, that we have some of the same preoccupations. I'll give a different perspective, namely the one from the European Commission, a perspective which includes our role both as, of course, a policymaker. How do we set open science policies? Also as a funder. As you may know, we have, of course, the Horizon Europe program as our flagship, a program that gives 15 billion per year to support research and innovation actions. And I should mention also our third perspective, which is a perspective of a convener, facilitator, an initiator of new initiatives, bringing together stakeholders, bringing together policymakers. I would like to start with this slide, which explains why at all we have an open science policy and why we have had such a policy at the top of our agenda for more than a decade now. And there are three keywords, and we are increasingly seeing also the evidence of that. We see increasingly a range of success stories that doing research by practicing open science leads to higher quality, higher efficiency, and higher impact of the research outputs. If we start with maybe the most important one, why practicing open science very often leads to higher quality of the outputs, because if we do it in a transparent way, if we are looking for results, intermediate or final ones that are accessible and that are reusable, this of course facilitates the process to verify the outputs, to in some cases reproduce the outputs, and at the end of the day we have seen this leads to much more robust research results, much more reliable research results. On the efficiency side, and here we come to Anna Maria's point of moving from open access to open science, when we are also encouraging the sharing of methods and outputs, the reuse of methods and outputs. This enables one research team, of course, in a much easier way to build on the outputs of another research team in a much easier and a much faster way, and this leads to faster progress also of the research cycle. So we are also talking here about the productivity of the research system overall. And finally, on the impact, very important that if we make it the outputs, but also the methodologies used in research, more visible, more accessible, both to public and to private actors. We facilitate also the inclusiveness, including the aspects of equity mentioned by Anna Maria. We make the whole valorization of research outputs easier, and at the end of the day, the practical application of the innovations that take place in the research system. It leads not only to increased uptake and increased use of the research results, but also in general by the public and by society, enhanced thrust in the research system and in the outputs of research. So this is why we have had this on the agenda, as I said, for more than a decade at the European level, and of course, very importantly, that this policy priority permeates into national research systems, into research institutes and research centers. So, are we there yet? Certainly not. Certainly not. If we look at the system across Europe, and indeed across the world, in Europe, less than 50% of all scientific publications are available in open access. Anna Maria showed the top 5 commercial scientific publishers. I have a figure here. If you look at the 10 largest subscription journals, and look at how many researchers, how many authors of articles retain the copyrights when they do a publication contract with the journals, it's only in one case. So in 10% of the cases, if you take the 10 biggest ones, the author retains copyright. If we move to data, research data, we recently, it was in 22, reaching into 23, we did a study where we asked more than 15,000 researchers, how often do you share your research data in public repositories? And it showed that in only 40% of the cases, researchers occasionally store their data in shared repositories. Most often they do it in private databases or institutional repositories. We also had, as part of this study, experts looking into the quality, or rather the fairness, so how these research data sets in these shared repositories were findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And we saw that if you look at all the parameters of what it means for a data set to be fair, you would be between 15 and 20% of researchers that put the FAIR principles into practice. So still a long way to go. I would like to mention also what you see there at the bottom right corner, which is also what Anna Maria talked about, what really counts in a researcher's career. What the researchers told us was that, well, in more than 80% of the cases, what counts is to publish in prestigious journals and to get funding to your research institution or your university. And these are about the two parameters that really count. And that leads to, and Anna Maria showed it again, it leads to hyper-publishing. And you are wondering how many will read these. You said 900,000 or even more in some cases, publications. And it leads also to hyper-competition for funding, and we see it in national programs. We certainly see it also in the European programs over subscription rates. In the middle there, you see also the very important investments that go into research infrastructures. Just in terms of operations across Europe, it's almost 3 billion per year. And this is not talking about, of course, the construction and the design of these research facilities. I said that this is very high on the political agenda. It has been for 10 years. Here you see that we are really trying to accelerate that. We don't want another 10 years to go by and, for instance, have still the same research assessment system. We don't want another 10 years to go by and only in 40% of the cases researchers share their data in public repositories. So 3 years ago, we said, let's try to accelerate this and work on what we call, in particular, enablers of practicing research in an open science way across Europe. We had research ministers across Europe sign what we call a pact for how you should do research and innovation in Europe, with a number of priority areas for joint action. And open science is at the top of this priority list of areas. Based on that, we established what we call a European Research Agenda policy agenda, actions 1, 2, 3, and a couple of others. They're all about open science. So you see, it's really top of the agenda. In the introduction, there was a mention of council conclusions. So this means a number of messages and key actions agreed by research ministers across Europe last year in 22, which had a focus on reforming research assessment, on the future of the scholarly publishing system, and on multilingualism. And in May this year, there was another set of conclusions from the council, which digged deeper into scholarly publishing, with all the keywords that you see on the slide. We want a scholarly publishing system which is, of course, still of very high quality, which is more transparent, which is more open, more trustworthy, and more equitable. Let me dig a bit deeper into these council conclusions, because I think they are particularly important for many of the sessions at this Open Science Fair. But I'll come to that later. First, the overall enablers as we see them. And I already mentioned many of them. I mentioned that it's important to reform the way we assess researchers and research organizations. I mentioned also the underlying provisions that we have, not only in our program, but also cutting across when it comes to authors' rights, when it comes to access rights. And I will also talk a bit later about some of the open science infrastructures that we are helping to put in place. This morning, the Secretary General of the Spanish Ministry also already mentioned the European Open Science Cloud, and there was a symposium last week in Madrid that I will also refer to. And we are also spearheading a publishing service for the beneficiaries of Horizon Europe, It's the Open Research Europe, or ORA, publishing platform. All the practices that we promote, you see on the left-hand side here, it's about open access, which is without embargoes, which is with open licenses, so what we call immediate and unrestricted. It's about research output management that follows the FAIR principles. And in general, it's also about early and open sharing of research, so pre-registrations, registered reports, but also opening up for collaboration with the non-academic actors, so with citizen groups, promoting, for instance, citizen science. The first chapter I would like to dig into is what we have promoted in the last 2 years, at least, which is the joint action that we have with stakeholders in particular and with member states across Europe in how to change the way we assess researchers and research organizations, how we give incentives and rewards, in particular also to practice open science. So we set up in 21 an action under the new European research area, which was aiming at having an agreement bottom-up by the stakeholder community, research performers, research funders, research evaluation agencies, and also to set up a platform where together they could move in a critical mass way, experimenting together with new assessment criteria, new processes, new tools for evaluating research. We also wanted this action to be very action-oriented. So once you had set up an agreement, you have formed a coalition, to have work going on in relatively short time periods, 1 year, 2 years maximum, working, for instance, within different disciplines, working with a focus on how you assess individual researchers. Another one could focus on what criteria you establish for looking at research proposals. So we wanted really to dig deeper in with real work, and these working groups coming out with concrete tools, a concrete set of different criteria that different institutions could be inspiring from. And also, we realized that it's very important not only to work bottom-up, stakeholder-driven, but also, of course, public authorities, legislation at the national level, rules for how to hire researchers were not blocking any reform for research assessment that was developed bottom-up. So these were the 3 goals that we set out in 21. And as you can see, I've already put it on the slide. The first one has been achieved, and I'll show that on the next slide. In 21, we were very confident that this had the backing of being a priority action in the new research area. We went throughout 2021 through very wide consultations, mainly with research performers, but also with research funders and other actors in the research system, and put down a set of principles for how this reform should happen. And then in the first half of 22, we facilitated from the European Commission side this drawing up of the agreement with what were concrete commitments that stakeholders would take to reform their research assessment system. And as you can see on the slide, there are now more than 600 research organizations that have signed this agreement. And so far, more than 500 of them have taken the offer to join this coalition, which is, as I said, a platform for sharing experiences, for experimenting together with reformed criteria and tools, and also for getting the evidence of what is working and what is not working in a reformed research assessment system, and sharing that on this platform, which is named COARA, Coalition for Advancing Research Assessment. But we wanted it, as I also said, to be very practical, to come up with concrete templates for narrative CVs, come up with criteria that would change and certainly not focus only on the very narrow criteria that we see today in research assessment systems that are typically the journal impact factor and the AIDS index. These are very dominant in current research systems. And of course, we all know that researchers do have a lot more activities, produce a lot more research outputs that are very valuable in terms of increasing the quality and the impact of research. So these working groups are now in full operations. Most of them kicked off here in September, or if not, the rest would kick off in October. There are 10 that have already been selected, and if you go to the website of QARA, you will see which ones there are. There are also national chapters. As I said, it's very important that the national framework conditions for reforming research assessment are not contradictory with what is being developed, and so far there are 5 national chapters. The one in Spain was mentioned this morning. There's one in Italy as well, Poland, and 2 others, and there will be 2 more coming up very soon. So this is all developing very fast now. And so go to the QARA site and see also, if you're interested, how you can join this work. If not, it's not already the case. In 2 sentences, this is what QARA is all about. It's to recognize that researchers, of course, do a lot more valuable work than writing articles for the most prestigious journals or writing proposals to get a grant to her or his institution. So it's recognizing this range of outputs, practices, and activities in research, and then rewarding those that lead to higher quality and higher impact of the research. In practice, this means that the assessment system needs to be much more qualitative in nature. It doesn't mean to completely abandon quantitative indicators, but it must be a much wider range of indicators, and they should be used in a responsible way and in connection with the qualitative assessment. So this is the overall mantra, if you like, of reforming research assessment. It's based, as I said, on the principles that were established at the end of 21. It's based on the commitments, which is behind the agreement, which was ready for signature in July last year, and that has now been signed by more than 600 research organizations. The time frame, as we said, we want to accelerate the transition to a new assessment system. Is that now, which is for many organizations 1 year after the signature, they need to establish what we call an action plan. What do you intend to do in terms of experimentation, evaluation of your current system? And then in 4 years' time from now, to have a touchdown point and see where we stand. Hope everyone should have been through at least 1 cycle of reform, assessment, and reevaluation. Very important from us. Now I see it again, I go back to the title of my speech, which is the perspective of the European Commission. As I said, we have initiated that, we have facilitated the establishment of this agreement and coalition, and now our role is shifting a bit. We very much see it as our responsibility also to have this link between the stakeholders and the national authorities, so that those organizations who have signed QARA and are now experimenting with new criteria, they are not hitting a wall when they want to implement the changes. So this could be national legislation, it could be national procedures, it could be costs also of implementing these reforms. So we want to really prevent contradictions across the different assessment systems and types that take place at national level. But of course, we have also our responsibility at the European level, so there are no contradictions between the indicators and the tools used by different systems. A second role we have is that we, the European Commission, we have also signed QARA. We also the agreement, and we are also part of the coalition, and that we are mainly as a funder. So, of course, you now know we have Horizon Europe. We are already preparing the next framework program that will start in 2028. And in less than 2 years, we will be putting forward a proposal for how this program should look. It will also include what we call the rules of participation, and part of these rules have to do with how we will assess proposals for the next framework program. So it's in that spirit also that we participate in one of the 10 working groups. Actually, we are co-leading this working group. We want to see how we can improve our criteria so that we are in line with the commitments that we have signed under QARA. Of course, in Horizon Europe, to the extent possible, we will also see how we can improve, for instance, templates and assessment forms. Our role is also to synergize with other initiatives. I mentioned the European Open Science Cloud. I mentioned the Open Research Europe publishing platform. European University Alliances is another link that we could make. How can they help become test beds of reformed research assessment criteria? And finally, also in international cooperation, we have our seats in the Global Research Council in various other formations that we need also to spread this initiative across the world. Moving quickly to another of the enablers that we are promoting at European level. And here I come exactly to the Council conclusions of May this year, which have the keywords that you see on the slide. But in particular, I would like to focus on what research ministers across Europe recommended as the way forward for changing the scholarly publishing systems. So first on framework conditions. Here what we can do, and this is our role, both at the Commission level, but also at member state level, it's our role to promote national open access policies and guidelines. It's our role also, as I said, talked about before, linking into reforms of research assessment. Our role as a legislator is very important here as well, because we have at EU level a number of acts about copyright legislation, data and digital legislation. And here we are looking into to which extent this is fit for research, both in terms of awareness of the legislation, understanding of the legislation, and perhaps, but we have to see that we're still in the analytical phase, to which extent we can change also part of these legislative acts. Infrastructures, as I said, we are having our own spearheading with Open Research Europe, but in general, we are also being encouraged, being invited by the research ministers across Europe to rebalance our investments towards non-for-profit, open access, scholarly publishing systems. So very much the kind of models that Anna Maria talked about before, and certainly Latin America is one inspiration for Europe. And finally, on training, of course, understanding the value of the research in terms of intellectual property rights is extremely important, but also understanding the predatory publishing. And again, I refer back to the previous keynote about the rise of these predatory journals. We are basing this not only on the Council conclusions of May, we are also very much supportive of the stakeholder-driven action plan for Diamond Open Access that was launched last year. We have a number of key projects in this area that we have been funding in the very first calls on the Horizon Europe, the DMS project, which is about building capacities for open access scholarly publishing at the institutional level, but also Craft OA, which is more on the technical side, the technical interoperability of different Diamond-like open access publishing systems. UNESCO was already mentioned. Of course, this is a continuous inspiration from our side. We had previous works done 4 or 5 years ago by an expert group that drew up 10 principles for how a new scholarly publication system should look like. And there are a number of other initiatives that we are also in contact with, Coalition S, so behind Plan S, ORC, the International Science Council as well. And of course, QARA is also relevant in the context of reform because it releases some of the pressure to establish only in a certain type of journals. Open Research Europe, as I said, this is the European Commission's open access publishing platform that we offer to the beneficiaries of Horizon Europe and Horizon 2020 grants. At the core of this publishing system is the model of post-publication open peer review. So first you publish and then the review takes place. And the review doesn't take place to select for publication because it has already been published, but it's in the spirit of having a dialogue between the peer reviewers and the author or the authors taking place, so that you improve the quality of what was published in the first place. Of course, we publish in open access under CC BY licenses. We have to, of course, walk the talk. We have quite high entry points, in the sense that there is a scientific advisory board that has set up a number of guidelines that are applied. So it's not that you can just publish. You have to, of course, to comply with these standards and these policies. In particular, it includes availability of the data sets that underlie the findings of the scientific publication, but also the methodology that has been used within the publication. Transparency, of course, is at the core as well. We publish in all disciplines. Very importantly is that we have the important indexes also. So this, of course, is very important to attract researchers to publish in Open Research Europe. For the time being, we are licensing a publishing platform. We are buying services from F1000, as you can see here. This has been to kickstart it, but as you will see on the next slide, we are moving towards an invitation that we also got in the Council conclusions, namely, why don't you make Open Research Europe a more collective exercise, so that beneficiaries of also national funding programs can publish in this platform. So we are discussing now with national research funders, with also broadening the consultation, for instance, to university presses, to see who would like to join Open Research Europe as a collective open access publishing platform. We have to see what will be, of course, the eligibility criteria. We're discussing also to which extent we can allow authors that are not necessarily do not necessarily have a grant either from the European Commission or from a national funder, even authors that are not attached to an institution, to allow her or him to publish in Open Research Europe. So we're still in discussions here. So far we have extended the licensing of the publishing platform, the buying of the services until 2026, but it's not too early if we want to be prepared for something more collective after 2026 to extend this platform. Very briefly about, I mentioned the legislative analytical work that we are looking into. This is a piece of work that we launched a year ago, asking a number of experts to look into the copyright data and digital legislation at the EU level. We had 2 huge workshops in June last year, and another one after consulting yet another series of experts in February this year. And now we are in a study where we are looking into concrete measures that could be taken, be they non-legislative or legislative, to change, on one hand, the awareness, the guidance, and perhaps the copyright framework or pieces of the copyright framework itself, through, of course, gathering evidence of what are the issues that researchers on a day-to-day basis are having when tackling copyright issues. And the same thing on the data and digital side. Here, though, it's more in terms of guidance. The pieces of legislation are more recent, so we also believe that here a study is merited to see what kind of measures we could take to make all this legislative framework more fit for research and researchers. A few words about the European Open Science Cloud. So here we're talking about a federated infrastructure that cuts across, of course, borders in Europe, but also across disciplines. So we're working at the different levels to see how we can coordinate investments and actions, and align policies also, and promote in general the what we call a web of fair data and services. What value will this add for researchers? It would add value in terms of being able much easier to find a data set across the federation, to be able to access and reuse it, to put together, to integrate data sets that are more and more of a heterogeneous nature. So this is about metadata, it's about semantic interoperability, but also enable researchers to find research services, analytical work, analytical tools, AI-based tools, again, across disciplines and across borders, and be able to also compose these services into a workflow that will match each and every need of the researchers. The system also, of course, should guarantee quality of the data set. It should guarantee quality and performance of the research services. So this is what it means in terms of value from the researcher's point of view. If you are a service provider to the research community, again, it would increase the outreach in terms of the user base. And from our side, also from the policymaker point of view, we would get a more complete view of all the resources that are available in the system. There's a particular focus, of course, on research data, research services, but in general, we're talking about digital objects. So it could also be pieces of software, pieces of code, also publications, of course. A bit of a schematic view to say that we're not talking about a new infrastructure, but really about a federation of existing research infrastructures at the thematic level. Could in some cases also be at the national level. We're also talking about service selection, so could be e-infrastructures that provide more generic services with some kind of reference point that will define how you authenticate and authorize to get into the system, of course, in a transparent way from the individual researcher, but very importantly also determines the access and use policies, so who can access, what is responsible use of the system, and also from the service provider's point of view, what are the rules of participating to provide a service into the system. Of course, researchers are not waiting for the European Open Science Cloud to start operating, fortunately. So we have also been supporting all the way back in Horizon 2020. We supported 5 big, what we call science clusters with around 10 million each. So in 5 key disciplines, we gave them grants to develop open science tools, search engines, composition of data sets, composing also different research services into what they needed in their specific discipline. So here you see an example project, which is in the photon and neutron community, that have developed what you could call a virtual research environment, or a mini EASC, if you like, in the discipline area. Another example here is the Blue Cloud that also has been going on since 2017-18, which is in the area of marine research and ocean modeling. Again, very impressive data management services, very impressive research services, and how they can be composed, how can they be accessed. And you will see that they are now coming to an end, actually both of them. Sorry, they have ended already, and they're already working on the next project where we have also given a grant, not one by one in the community, but we have decided for the next phase it's important that they come together because we see many similar approaches across the disciplines. So of course it's not surprising. The way they are adopting common fair data policies, the way they have developed standard metadata, they use common templates for the DMPs, for the data management plans, and also the kind of services that are needed for the scientific data. We see very much that if they come together, they would benefit also from services across disciplines. This one I have to mention as well. It was one of our first showcases of EASC, which was in April 2020. And you certainly remember April 2020 in the lockdown. We, in a matter of 2 months, we established what was called the European COVID-19 data portal that has since grown, but not only in terms of data sets around COVID-19, but also related data sets from clinical trials all the way down to socioeconomic data. So this was a real example of combining heterogeneous data sets. It was reused also for another virus, the monkeypox, a couple of years later. And now you see here extending to the pathogen world beyond viruses. So really it's a worldwide pathogens portal that has been supported again very much from the European Commission side. ESC Life is mentioned here, and by COVID are two of the key projects that we funded during the last 2-3 years. So, in terms of, again, the European Commission perspective on ESC, we make sure that sharing of fair digital objects in general is supported from a policy point of view, both from the European Research Agenda, European Research Area policy, but also from the point of view of the European strategy for data. We support it also, of course, with funding. In Horizon Europe, it's almost 500 million that we put into ESC-related calls. And of course, in terms of governance also, important for us to keep this dialogue going, both at the European, national and institutional level. Let me end with this area, which is also very important for us, how we support, in particular, the direct involvement of citizen groups, but also public authorities in the research, so involving non-academic actors in research and innovation. We had in Horizon 2020 the Science with and for Society program. We decided in Horizon Europe that it's worth to have a push of this community into mainstream research and innovation in different thematic areas, health research, transport research, energy research, and instead concentrate the funding in Horizon Europe on platforms or incentive setting for supporting citizen and societal engagement in research. So on the left-hand side, you see the European Citizen Science Project, which is about building capacities, building awareness of citizen science, very much in a co-creation, co-design way of involving citizens in research. So if you go to that platform, you will see lots of course, shared information, common tools, possibilities for partnering and collaboration. On the right-hand side, another key project that we have launched, which is about kickstarting citizen science initiatives or maintaining citizen science initiatives, which of course is always an issue, the sustainability of these typically very small initiatives. We are also with the member states we already had this exercise on mutual learning between policymakers across Europe. We had 11 member states, associated countries in this exercise that went through a number of topics, as you can see there, sharing good practices, maximizing the impact, and looking also at the enabling environments for setting up citizen science initiatives. And we will soon be launching another one, which is broader than, if you like, citizens doing the research with scientists, and also looking at what happens more upstream in terms of co-designing activities that should be a priority in the research agenda, to experimenting and co-assessing what comes out of research, and in general also linking what we do in terms of citizen engagement in research with what is done in terms of citizen engagement in deployment of the research. So this, we're very much looking forward to this. We will launch it probably at the end of October, and it will run again for 12-15 months. And with that, I thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Let's see if my microphone is, yeah, there we are. Thank you, Michael. We have already a lot of questions in the Mentimeter. It really exploded. Anna will join us here on stage, but I first have one particular question for you, Michael, and that is about the tension between the EC as a policymaker and a funder. don't you see here and there that there is tension between the two? I'm thinking, for example, with the Council conclusions where member states and the EC are requested to have non-profit, more diamond-like infrastructure. Isn't that one of the examples where there could be a tension between the policymaker and the funder, how you approach this?
I don't think so. I think that we, in fact, were a bit ahead of the Council conclusions because we already put funds into DMS, Craft Away. We already said that in Horizon Europe, we're not going to reimburse costs in hybrid journals, so which is something we did before. So those savings there, we have been able to channel into more direct support. We have shifted also the priorities in the work programs. So I think it very much follows the policy. I should say we are also part of Plan S and Coalition S, which is definitely also going in that direction.
So you don't feel a tension there?
There's always a tension, but no, I think we are really going in that direction.
Okay. Now we will sit down, and I invite Anna as well. Yes, sorry that this. You need another microphone. Please go ahead. We have quite some questions here in the Mentimeter. Go ahead. And I tried to collect some of them in a few themes. There have been there are quite a lot of questions on the publishing system. And I will certainly start with the question that got a lot of likes on Mentimeter, which is not an easy one. Since the ongoing reforms of research assessment, for example, COARA, strive for assessing the article/output instead of the journal, does this mean journals are becoming obsolete? And where are we heading then? Do you have something to say in that, Anna Maria? Normally your microphone. So,
works?
Yeah, it works.
Yes. Okay.
So
focusing on the
do you think that now the research assessment, when we talk about evaluation, the focus will be more on the article or a research artifact or process instead of the journal? And what will that mean for journals?
I don't think so. I am not afraid that the journals will disappear. I mean, they have a long history, and they have not only survived, but evolved and adjusted to the times. And the last adjustment is, of course, going online, and they have enough capacity to continue to evolve. I mean, they have been already for 4 centuries or more with us, so they will continue. But as I see it, the trends of the research assessment are rather to include other types of activities of scientists, because as scientists we are involved not just in publishing, in producing papers, no, but many other things which are important for, for science itself and for the social benefits of science, no? And this is where I see the great opportunity if now this open science movement can also turn to those other activities, valuable, value-producing activities of us as scientists. That's what we should push for.
Okay, so journals won't immediately disappear. Let's do that. A question for both of you, but I start with, or maybe you want to say, react to that.
Yeah, I agree with you that journals will not disappear. If you ask a researcher what she or he identifies with, it's her or his community. Mm-hmm. And sometimes this is assembled in a journal. It's something that we are also very aware of in the context of Open Research Europe. It's a bit a chicken and egg situation because we're just starting, so we have very few articles. But there is the concept of collections and gateways in Aura, and it's exactly, you might call them mini journals. We don't call them mini journals, but it's exactly how a community gets together. And so this is not the issue. I think the issue is not journal, it's what Anna Maria said, that it's about rewarding what we value in research, and that's much more than publishing in a journal.
Absolutely. There were other questions about publishing and, of course, predatory publishing. There was one question referring to which I take now to refer to UNESCO, was it the toolkit that worked together with AIP report on predatory publishing practices. So in the toolkit that UNESCO developed, they included the report that the Inter-Academy group published on what are predatory practices, and there is a scale of predatory practices, and it's included in the UNESCO toolkit, because there's also the concern in one of the questions that we sometimes take this too much to the open access journals, predatory practices, while we can see that in the whole system. Maybe you see that also in what happens through your experience as a researcher. What is your view on that?
Yes. Well, I can speak of my experience as a researcher and as a member of the IAP study group. No? Yeah. It was a very, very interesting experience. No, as a researcher, I mean, well, we don't see any relation, any correlation and any relation between open access, especially between true open access and the quality of our research. We look for a journal where we can, since these are specialized journals that we normally have in mind, that's where we publish our work so that other colleagues interested in this specialized work get to know about it, which is one particular area of activity of scientists, no? Not the only one. And if that journal is open access, of course it's convenient for us. If it is, if we don't have to pay APCs, it's even much better. No? Mm-hmm. And if we have to pay them and have the resources to do so, then of course it's more convenient also for us. And otherwise, we somehow share with our colleagues, even if it's not open access. But I don't see, and we don't see any relation with quality, and it is very unfortunate that the two are somehow in the minds of many people connected in that way, because it is not so.
Yeah, because when you look at the predatory practices, some of the practices that they mention are absolutely also used by closed journals, so the quality and how predatory works is more diverse than we sometimes see.
Yes, I think it's important to mention here that researchers, but also the system or the people around the researcher, need to be constantly critical of where the researcher wants to disseminate the work. And this includes looking at the system of the journal, being it open or closed. Mm-hmm. What is the peer review system? I mean, we all know that being reviewed by peers is very often, it is central to the whole assessment system. Looking also at the processes, and in particular the entry points. Is the journal demanding the data availability underlying? Is the journal demanding a quality, a rigor in the methodology behind what is being published? And then, as you also pointed out, open access definitely does not mean a decrease of quality. On the contrary, We have proof that they are more cited. We have proof that when there is data transparency, the underlying data transparency, when this data set is fair, again, you have more crediting, and so proof of higher quality of if you publish your findings in an open way.
Sometimes there are questions about shouldn't we have lists of publishers and journals that should be blacklisted or whatever. What is your view on that? Would that be something that we need to do as a community?
Well, yes, this was much discussed, of course, at in the IAP group, and also in Latindex we have had plenty discussions. We have, I must say, we have our very, very confidential blacklist, and it is very difficult to even have a confidential blacklist because journals, I mean, the editors are very tricky, you know. They know how to deceive us, and you spend a lot of time finding out whether there is a malicious intention or it's just bad quality or whatever, no? Open blacklists are dangerous. They are prone to be on demand, to get banned, legally demanded, and so it's not the way to go. And also because, you know, you spoke about the spectrum, and the spectrum is, I mean, it's continuous. It's continuous from very good, very reliable to obviously fraudulent. No? And you have everything in between, and it moves all the time. I mean, we know about big editorial publishers, no, that have hundreds of titles, and that started rather predatory, and now are moving, at least some of their titles are moving to become very reliable and well recognized, and this is, and the other way around it also. And not all mainstream journals that are in the commercial databases are reliable either, no? So one better looks at the individual journal, and if one is enough, let's say, knowledgeable of the science in one's area, then one knows where to publish. The problem is with the young people who are under this pressure, no? And also there's a problem in those environments that don't have that scientific standing or scientific quality, because not all the world has institutions that are so, let's say, of high quality. Yeah. So that's where, of course, these kind of business or journal publishers can make business more easily.
Do we need more support for the?
Well, I think it's indeed it's impossible. I think now to make a blacklist. I mean, we have a list of what venues are fully open access. This we need to know because that's what we reimburse. But indeed, there's this continuum, and there are no strict criteria for when we would say no to one. I think I'll come back to and I come back to what I said about. It has to be judged from within the community, from within peers, of what is high quality, and you know, if it's known within the community that this is a predatory journal, then hopefully they will be less used. I mean, it's not. There are other motivations, but I think, at least from a funder's point of view, it's not possible today.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Now, moving away a bit from predatory, but. Last question in the realm of open access. It's a question that got a lot of votes. Is our role in this discussion and the wish for change credible if we still cling to the power of big publishing? For example, if we look at sponsors of this conference, of our other conferences. So Are we still credible if we do that? I find that a very difficult question to answer. I don't know if you have any reactions to that. So what do we do in conferences? How do we react? How is our position towards the bigger players in this field?
You want to respond first this time?
I can go first.
It's a difficult one, I know.
It's a difficult one, and there are limits as to what we can do, because we're also talking about private sector actors. And we're talking about a situation which is highly unbalanced. The amounts, if you look at the amounts going into subscriptions, and amounts going into the open access part. What we're doing instead, and I could display one of the slides, which was the one from the Council conclusions, that we're working on other fronts that will have an impact. So it's not working directly on that front, because these are also being dealt with outside of our sphere. It's not something that we as the Commission is directly involved in. I'm talking, of course, in particular about negotiations between big producers and the different national research systems. But on the other, what we're doing instead is to work on other fronts, starting with the policy front, which is about pushing something we have done since 2012 for national open science or open access policies. We are pushing now, as I said, in the last 2-3 years, for reforming the way you assess researchers, which hopefully will also have an influence on this balance. We are working on the legislation to see, so the copyright legislation in particular, to see what can be done there as well, in terms of, in the air is the idea of a harmonized, a European level secondary publication right. Something which is among the measures that could be proposed. Let's see what the study says in terms of what kind of impact this likely would have. We see different, at the institutional level, we see different rights retention strategies. Hence the importance also for us in the Council conclusions to push for awareness, at least of the IPRs. Researchers need to know what they have in their hands. And lastly, we are financially supporting consortia like the one behind DMS, which is about building capacities, which is needed because it needs to be a professional service, a service which researchers recognize and want to use. So the answer is that we are not addressing it directly, but we are addressing it through different funds, policy, lawmaking maybe, or different measures around the legislation, and as a funder as well, to try to rebalance the investments.
Anything to add?
Yes, well, my answer will be perhaps a bit more philosophical. I'm optimistic. I think things will change. They have to change. I see the current situation in this regard, the fact that too many of our journals are in the hands of commercial publishers for profit, is a natural consequence of the system in which we are living. It started this, let's say, commercialization, that has led to science, and especially scientific publications becoming sort of a merchandise, is a consequence of the evolution of the, let's say, the economic paradigms of last century. And you can even see that the UN Secretary General has said that things have to change in this regard. And they have to change. And I think I'm optimistic because I think there's a limit to the growth of these big systems. I always think of the dinosaurs which were extinct after some time. And there are some good signs. For instance, at the recent conference organized by ISSN, I spoke of, from my perspective, it was an international conference, and I spoke from my perspective about the value of scientific and cultural and institutions, universities, and associations having the control of publications in my region. And colleagues from other parts of the world, even from Europe and the United States, said, yes, that's the way we have to go. We have to recover the control of publications because it's part of our mission. Mm-hmm. So it's good that people start thinking that way. Not everything is so necessarily linked to the money, to getting funding, etc. We have to think that, of course, you mentioned figures of funding that are absolutely out of proportion for us. No? Well, you may be very happy to have this amount, this level of funding in Europe, but it's not like that everywhere. So we have to think of other models. Mm-hmm. And in this regard, I think in those regions where publishing and funding and doing science and funding have not been so tightly linked as here, for example, or in the US, we have the advantage of thinking otherwise, of thinking of other models that do not link them so tightly.
Well, that brings it to another question that is in the Mentimeter, because the question says that most open science discussion is focused on open access like we have done now and open data. Yes. However, the UNESCO framework puts participation and dialogue as equal pillars. How should participation and dialogue be included in open science policies? How should we encourage that?
That is a big challenge, you know, because you spoke in the last part of your talk, which I enjoyed very much, thank you. You spoke of citizen science. That's part of it, but it's not all. I mean, there is also a component of open science that has to do with being open ourselves as a system, as a scientists, to other ways of creating knowledge, you know, that could benefit science and it could benefit the rest of the population and humankind. And this, especially in countries from other parts of the world, is an important component because we have other populations that create knowledge or have created it in the past, but are creating still today, and that are not taken normally into account because they are not part of the scientific system. No, and I'm not talking about pseudoscience. No. I'm talking really of knowledge that has, among other things, helped these populations to survive and get ahead. So how can this become part of the open science ecosystem? That still needs a lot of work. You have mentioned one organization that is dealing with that. How to first, we need to think of the process to establish a respectful dialogue between these different systems. And then we can think of how to, I wouldn't want to say measure that, but to somehow monitor this and see that the open science ecosystem is really making progress in this regard. So this is still, there are many open questions. But for countries like mine, where biodiversity and cultural diversity are an asset which we do not want to lose because we know it is important not just for the country but for the whole humanity, we can't simply ignore that component.
I know time is up, but I take a few more minutes because we started a bit later. Maybe, Michael, you want to add something to what you already said in the presentation?
Yeah, so I'll not go into citizen science again. And indigenous knowledge also indeed is important. it's not exactly indigenous knowledge, but the whole purpose of data legislation in Europe is to make more data available for research as well. So it's really, it started with opening up the data in the public sector, then recognizing that some of the data in the public sector is sensitive, so how can we work with trusted intermediaries? And the latest piece under the data legislation, the Data Act, is looking at ways to get into data held by the private sector in certain emergency cases, for instance. So this is an example which is not talking about indigenous people, but which is talking about data which is very useful for research and how this can make the open science movement even more impactful. You mentioned equity as well. I think for us this is becoming increasingly important on the policy agenda. The fact that it's not, it has a cost to practice open science. The benefits will come down the line, but it has a transition cost, and it's a cost which is it's not easy to bear across the spectrum. Latin America, you're talking about very different levels of income, and even within Europe, also you have different capacities in terms of what you're able to afford, in terms of the infrastructure you have in place. And then one last thing in terms of equity, the skills. The skills development, again, is important for it to happen. Just to talk about data stewards, there's a lack of them, how to best organize them, how to train people in all kinds of open science methods.
Okay. Do you want to react?
Yeah. Yes. Particularly after what you said, and also what you said during your intervention. I mean, having an open science ecosystem doesn't mean striving for homogeneity. You just mentioned, even in Europe, you have different conditions in countries and among countries and also within countries. And there are also different motivations for doing research. No? You can think of institutions, well, research universities. There are other universities that are not so focused on research, but more on, let's say, education. Or you have technical institutions, polytechnical institutes that have different motivations, and also between one country or the other. So one has to be very careful in not making now performance assessments that look at just one model. One has to take all these different motivations into account. I think this is very important. We are complementary. We don't have to be all equal. No? Equity is not equality in this sense. No? But one word I have not heard, and when we speak of so many data that now we want to have in repositories or open science infrastructures or whatever, one has to think also not just of today, but of, I don't know, 10 years from now, 50 years from now. What is going to happen with all these data? How are we going to keep these data accessible? Is there any also concern from those who are collecting so many data to have them available in the long term? This is another. This entails another cost, quite high, no? And because we have to think on curating them, on being capable of translating them to another system so that they're still readable, etc. I think we are all thinking of what we want to have today, and not thinking of whether we want to keep all that for tomorrow, for the next generations. We have to have this more long-term perspective. But Sorry.
No problem. On that note, I think that is a very, that's an issue certainly to address later on. A lot of other questions evolved around AI. We have a session tomorrow morning around AI and open science. Also other questions around research assessment that we couldn't, because time is up, that we couldn't deal with today. But later today, there will be sessions on research assessment, monitoring, and how this all comes together. I would like to thank our speakers again for their cooperation. Thanks a lot for being here. So we will have fruitful discussions during these days. Now we have a coffee break for half an hour, so we reconvene at 12.